welcome to another exciting episode of the R F Talkshow. As always, we are especially excited in this episode because we have another special guest in the studio. I'm going to introduce this guest just a little bit later. But before we start the show, I'd like to say a special thank you to a few people. Thank you to Smart Picture because they are producing this show, Smart Picture Entertainment. Also, a big thank you to those that are following the show. Please make this episode today very interactive. Be involved. So today, on this episode, we will be talking about domestic violence or family violence. Our guest in studio today is Dr. Joseph Masika. We've all heard about the man, and we are just so excited that he honored our invitation to come into the studio. So thank you so much. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. So who is Dr. Joseph Masika?
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me today to come to the studio. I feel so honored and privileged and to come to share conversation with the community and the audience outside the studio about domestic violence. As you introduced me, my name is Joseph Masika. I'm from Tanzania. That's my country, and I've been in Australia for almost 20 years. And on the other note, I work for the state government, and I'm involved with the South Australian Multicultural and Ethnic Affairs Commission. I'm one of the commissioners in the commission since 2011, but also have other responsibilities within the states.
Okay.
In the community, we say, look, we have about 20,000 Africans in South Australia.
Okay.
But around the nation, in the whole of Australia, we have about 1 million Africans, people of African background.
Wow, 1 million.
1 million.
Wow.
And I'm the national president of the Federation of African Communities Council in Australia. So also it's my responsibility to advocate on this big number of Africans with the Commonwealth government, and also supporting up the state leaders when they engage with their governments within their own territories and the states.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We are just so honored to have you on the show. Some of the things you've done within the community, we could take a whole show just to talk about some of the things you've been involved with.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on the show. So today we are talking about domestic violence, and everybody said bring Dr. Masika in the studio to talk about it. You are the ambassador
For White Ribbon.
for White Ribbon.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I became ambassador in 2008. By then, we were quite a few people who agreed to be ambassador. And the role of ambassador is to educate men about the better use of masculinity.
Oh, yes.
And where the White Ribbon started, probably I can give you the background. This was on the 6th of December 1989 in Montreal, Canada, where there was a young man who entered into classroom where the students were doing engineering course. And when he entered the classroom, it was early in the morning, around 10 o'clock. It was very chill, the weather was very cold.
This is in Canada.
In Canada,
Yeah.
So it was early in the morning. So he entered the classroom with a machine gun and a knife, also a pocket knife. And he ordered all female staff to get out of the classroom. There were about 60 students. So he ordered all male students to get out of the classroom. And then there were 14 women left in the classroom, and he shot them dead, all of them. And when he was taken into custody and being interviewed to ask why did he commit such a crime, and his response was that he couldn't withstand to see women do engineering course. That course is for men. And
Wow.
he killed up those women because they are intruding the territory which is exclusively for men. And from there, 1990, is when the United Nations decided to honor those women who were killed because of being female, being women, to have a day which is known as United Nations International Day for Elimination of all form of domestic violence against women and children.
Mm.
So in Australia, this didn't come on board until 2003.
Okay.
That's when it started gaining momentum. So in South Australia, it's 2008. So we were quite a few people who were there by then, and it is really good to see also George Fomba was one of the ambassadors who came on board on that time, and Masika, I think it was Masika.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is the background of the white ribbon, and the white ribbon has gone strength to strength, and the role of it is to educate women and also support men to have that conversation and the action which can make women feel safer.
Okay. So, wow, that's thank you so much for that background. I didn't know about that. That's quite horrific.
Yeah, it's horrific. Yeah.
No, let's talk about domestic violence. We hear a lot about, this expression. What does it actually mean? What's the legal definition of domestic violence?
In the community, people, they were very different understanding of domestic violence. They think that when you have physical violence against a woman or in relationship, that is violence, domestic violence. But under legal definition of violence, domestic violence, it's more than that, because there are so many other categories being involved within that definition, and that one can include abusive, abusive, verbal abusive. That is one. Can be physical violence, can be emotional abusive, can be financial, can be sexual, and also can be psychological, and it also can be social. So there are so many groups, and the men, in the relationship, they use it. The aim is to control a woman, is to intimidate a woman, it's to dominate the woman. It's a behavior which wants to evolve, which give men imbalance of power so that they can control the woman in relationship.
So control is core.
Yes, control. It's a behavior which leads to control and dominate. Because when you are using up domestic violence, you want to embarrass the other partner with a relationship. So you want to scare them, to be worried about you, about the person who is perpetrator of domestic violence. So that is behavior which is the end result is to control the woman. Yeah.
Okay.
So there are so many forms of violence being involved into that.
Okay. Hopefully we can discuss most of those forms in detail during this conversation. So within the African communities in Australia, do you think domestic violence is a serious issue?
Yes, domestic violence is a serious issue, not only in the African communities, across all cultures, all classes, and religions. But they differ from one area to the other. And the reasons behind why it has happened, it differs based on where people they come from. To be honest, I'm from Africa. I'm from society where men is a male-dominated society, where men put themselves first. So there's that imbalance of power. And we see in the society we come from, men comes first. And his demands needs to be attended first. If they are not being met first, that's where we see domestic violence kicking in the relationship. So based with my positions, my position in the government, in the community, and what we see through the statistics, domestic violence is an issue in the African community. I'm not denying about it. It's an issue. And I've seen so many families break down, and the marriages break down because of domestic violence. But when you talk to men, you say, why this has happened? They say, no, I didn't touch my wife. Because in their mind, they believe that unless you use physical violence, it's when they say it's domestic violence.
Okay, but unless there's physical injury.
Injuries, that's why they say domestic violence. But we have seen so many other forms of domestic violence, which has led for the family breakdown. So it's an issue.
Okay.
And when we started to classify the community by another community, we can also see some differences. In some other communities, it's very prevalent, and in some other communities, it's very minimal. But we can't be sure 100% that it's minimal because it's not happening, or it's because women
are not reporting.
They are not reporting, and they are probably being under the cloud of culture that this is you should expect in a marriage, and you should tolerate.
Okay.
Yeah, but I could say clearly that domestic violence is an issue.
Okay. I just want you to make the correlation between, you talked about most of our society that we come from is very patriarchal, a male-dominant society.
Yeah.
How does that relate to domestic violence, given the culture of, man dominance?
Yeah.
and domestic violence?
Yes, that's also, it's obvious because where we come from, women are being told they have to submit themselves to their husbands. So the husband is the head of the house. Whatever the husband said can be challenged. It has to be followed. It's an order. And where we come from, other men, including me during my being young, going through young adult, I could hear men saying, "Look, you are a man. You have to control your wife. You have to control your woman."
Like actually use the word control, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the culture. You're obligated under the word culture that as a man you have to do it. And the people, they grew up with that mentality that I'm a man, and the women, they've gone through their own mentality that you have to submit yourself to the man, and you have to listen what your husband wants. And you can't say no, or you can't take it out of the marital home and talk about, say, look, I've been abused, because other women, they won't understand what you're talking about. So our culture has been also one of the reasons seeing this perpetuation of domestic violence. And that's one of the areas which we are targeting, to say, look, there's no room for using culture as an excuse. And also, we are using that one to say, look, we know we are from patriarchal society, we know we are male-dominated society, but we needed to break that cycle. We can't make that perpetuation from one generation to the other. So we needed to bring these young people in a new mindset where they can be free from domestic violence. They can see women as equal and they respect, and see that there's no differences of sexes in terms of doing the things which we do in the public, whether it's employment, what we do at home. We don't come and say, look, I'm a man, everyone has to worship me, has to make sure that you listen what I'm saying.
I love that word.
I've seen it. Yeah.
I'm very young, but I've seen this as well, where this entitlement, men feel very entitled.
Absolutely. That's
and
right.
Sometimes some women actually nurture that.
Yes, because that's how they've been conditioned.
Okay.
Because once you grow up and you see back home in Africa, mom does the same to the dad, and then you grow up believing that was needs to happen. And also, when they reach up puberty, they get up so they have to go and be taught by the aunties. They say, look, this is now how to respect your husband. This is what you need to do to your husband. So they grow up with that mentality. And most of the people in Adelaide or across the nation, when I visit some other states, women, they normally come and see me, or the husband come and see me. They say, look, can you help me? My marriage is going down the drain. And I say, what did you do? He said, no, I did this. I said, why did you do it? That is the domestic violence. They said, I didn't know, but in Africa, everyone does. I said, local men, you're not in Africa. Even in Africa, things are changing. So we are moving up to a new high level where we need to have so many men in white ribbon, where we can have that conversation and say, look, how can we all in relationship respect each other and no one is above the other, and how can we balance that power without one controlling the other one?
Exactly. One of the most difficult things for men to do is to change his mindset.
Yes.
This is a culture, and a culture is identity. It's sometimes who you are. It's going to be hard work trying to change that mentality. How can we go about doing that?
Yeah, I don't think whether it's a hard way. I know people when they come, and if they get information to debunk what they have in their mind, to say, look, it's not right, and this is how you need to balance the power. You can't withhold all the finances, and you expect the woman to come, your wife to come and beg. Every time you give her $1, I give you this one there. Or you can't put your demands to your wife without having consideration. You can't isolate your wife, because if she goes out to talk to other women, she will know other things which is wrong, which you are doing, and you decide to isolate. You can't do those things.
Okay.
But we have seen from time to time, when you engage into conversation with the men and make them realize that what they're doing is not right, you see some changes.
Okay.
And we say, okay, we have those already, parents, but we are also targeting those in schools, young ones. And at home, we are trying to make sure that the young ones, they just learn and the parents, they help these young men to learn, the children to learn, whether it's a girl or it's a boy, to have a positive mindset, which will take them from this way of controlling to think girls are less than boys, or boys to think themselves to be superior than girls. So we are trying to shift that. It can be done, but it's not going to be an easy one. It will take some time, because the other one is generation. We have to take time to bring the other generation to understand. So it's not something which we can do fix. We can do quick fix. And the other things which I've seen in Australia, which we don't do it right, it's about the government can come and allocate the funding, but they do allocation for 12 months, fiscal year, financial year. They say, look, here's money. We are going to target domestic violence, try to educate and minimize violence against women. But at the end of that cycle, financial cycle finishes, and that's the finish. But they think we've already done it. But it takes a generation to try to go with it year after year, until they grow up, they end up with a different mindset. Okay. So that is the challenge which we are putting to the government. Say, look, short-term quick fix, they don't work. It just does work. But we need a long-term strategy. And long-term strategy is to educate the men who are already grown up, and also come to the young ones to break that cycle.
Okay. Yeah. So we are talking with Dr. Masika. Hope you are enjoying the conversation. Please send through your comments or whatever question you've got for our guest, so that we can keep this rolling. So I've got another question that's really pressing on my mind.
Yes.
Why victims don't leave, especially women, when they're in a relationship, it's not working? Why is it so difficult for them to leave?
Yeah, it's difficult because, as I said, look, the aim of the men using domestic violence is to control, and they create fear to the victim. And they create that, once you go into the victim's mind and control the victim psychologically, the victim tends to believe that you are the only one they have in this world, and you are the only one who can provide that protection to them. And they can't leave because you have already controlled their mindset. And that's why it's become difficult for them to move. And the others we've seen, they've tried to move on, but they end up lost their life. Because the men, they came to hunt them down and kill them. So we have that fear in the community within the victims, and also the aim of using of the domestic violence to create fear and control, and scare those victims to think, if I leave, he's gonna go after me and will kill me. So they have to be there because they believe the perpetrator is the only person who is close to them and who can control them, who can support them and provide care to them. And the other things which makes victims to leave is because of within the society, find women, they are more disadvantaged compared to men.
Overall,
in terms of economic empowerment, men have more powers compared to women. And let's say in the African community, I'll pick up our own community, find more men are educated than women. And why more men are educated than women? It starts from where we come from. Because men, they'll be given preference to go to school, and women, they'll be returned home to support economic activities to generate income. That is one. And the second reason, that it comes through within the family. They say, look, if they have a limited amount of resources, they will rather invest on men, because the men will remain within the family. Okay. But if they invest on woman, on the girl, will be married and will go to the other family.
Another family.
So that is the reason. And by doing that, you find that women are less educated. And when they come like here, you find that women can't gain employment. But the men, because they're educated, they can find out a job and move on. So the women becomes depending on the men. So if they leave, well, they're going to get support. So that economic empowerment, which is necessary, and also the creation of fear and scare to these victims, that's why they end up to stick there. And the other things which cause them is the support within the government system, within the public. it's not that much. It makes up, the women still stick up with the abusive husband than living there. And the fourth one, which makes the victim stay, I'll pick again from one African community, is because when the woman leaves, the entire community just cut off.
And also stigma as well.
Stigma comes there that she's the cause of the problem. Why she deserted the husband, the family? Why she didn't stay with the husband? Yes, he beats you, or he abuses you, or financial whatever. Why did you stick with her?